Good morning, Wabash. Today's speaker is Matt Dudevoir. Matt Dudevoir came to Wabash as a Sigma Chi pledge in 2000. He joined the Sphinx Club in the fall of 2002 and enlisted the same fall in the Army National Guard. He left Wabash twice before graduating, once for Army Airborne School in 2003 and once to deploy in Afghanistan in 2004. After Afghanistan, he became an Army officer and attended Ranger School before returning to Wabash to finish his degree in 2006. He currently resides in Crawfordsville, right between Tommy's and the Lou. Yeah. And is an active duty platoon leader in Indiana's only airborne unit, as well as a recruiter of officers for the Indiana Guard. This is Dudevoir's second chapel talk of the year, and the title of this talk is In the Shadow of Giants. Please welcome him.
Thank you, Robert, for that wonderful introduction, which I wrote myself. And thank you, Wabash, for having me back here a second time. Some of you might not remember, I gave a chapel talk last September, just weeks into the fall semester. Gave a speech in memory of two Wabash men who'd given their lives overseas, paying tribute to their memory, first by poking fun at our college's new president, and then by reading an obscure fart joke from Moby Dick. So imagine my surprise when I was asked to speak here a second time. Somehow I've failed to wear out my welcome, but we'll see if I can't do something about that in the next half hour. I'll go ahead and admit up front I'm at a bit of a loss for what to say. Really hadn't expected to have another opportunity to do this, so I sort of used all my top shelf material last time, which once again was a fart joke. So first I heard of a second chance to do this was last week in the Allen Center, where I've taken to working out every day as a New Year's resolution of sorts. Sphinx Clubber C.I. Shelton was spraying down the exercise equipment, and as he made his way to the exercise bike next to mine, I asked if I was interested in giving another chapel talk. Of course, I said. Just make sure and give me enough notice so that I've got enough time to write something. So 2 days ago, C.I. approaches me again and asks if I want to speak today. So for future reference, when I said give me enough notice, it's not quite what I had in mind. Still, how could I say no? Wabash needed me, and as a loyal son, I heeded the call. So after coming home from work yesterday, I took a nap, then rolled up my sleeves and prepared for yet another all-nighter for the sake of my alma mater. Incidentally, this is exactly where I found myself the night before my last chapel talk. It was nearly midnight. I was staring at a blank Microsoft Word document, and I seem to recall last time I told myself no matter what, I wasn't going to put myself in that situation again. But oh well, as with last time, you're stuck with me, so here goes nothing. Still haven't answered my own question, though. What to talk about? Last night, as I pondered this, I did what any resourceful Wabash man does when in doubt. I scoured through old papers I'd written for ideas. It wasn't as fruitful as I'd hoped, though, although I might be able to tie one in later today. For now, is this for a topic? What am I really doing up here? Don't get me wrong, I am flattered, but twice in a year. I spoke last fall about the importance of this chapel, how it houses the soul of this institution. In his inaugural chapel talk, President White contemplated the character and quality of this soul, suggesting it was discourse that defines the liberal arts, and that the spirit of discourse should be encouraged to thrive, the college is to be healthy. I'm concerned then for the spirit of discourse in Wabash today, if the current shortage of available chapel speakers is to be any indicator of its condition. Saying this, I'm not trying to embarrass the Sphinx Club's chapel coordinators, but rather to challenge them to think outside the box, and it's easier said than done. From my time with the Sphinx Club, I remember how tough it could be. There were, of course, the rock-steady veterans of the chapel, on whom the club could always rely to entertain and inspire us. Dr. Blix would speak before homecoming, Dr. Warner or Coach Creighton before Monon Bell. Dr. Kubiak was another club favorite for his unapologetic defiance in the face of a changing campus. Heroes were made in this chapel, and I still vividly remember their speeches, some of which I heard here years ago. At some point, though, you run out of the old standbys, and I think this is where the problem began. In my time, we at the Sphinx Club were very selective about who we chose to speak here. As an organization dedicated to steadfast adherence to college tradition, the chapel was our most effective our most effective vehicle for promoting our agenda. We sought out speakers who we thought would say what we wanted to hear, while we overlooked many members of the Wabash community who were either less outspoken or, we boycotted some entirely. As a student, I saw no fault in this. Like I said, I heard some excellent chapel talks in my time here, and the best feeling I like to walk away from these with was a sense of righteous affirmation. I'm a Wabash man, I would think to myself, practically beating my chest as I descended the chapel steps. I stand for things like tradition and values and stuff. This is all excellent stuff, this protective, vigilant, slightly paranoid celebration of one's place in the collective college identity. It's been an absolutely essential part of my identity as a Wabash man, both as a student and a graduate, and I forever keep that part of myself close to my heart. Yet I can't help but wonder if I could have gotten something more out of the chapel. I heard many excellent speeches here by a few excellent professors, but there are many other people whom I've never heard speak here once. For example, I've never heard David Meharry give a chapel talk, or Cheryl Hughes, Melissa Butler, Kay Widows, Judy Wynn at the bookstore, or Dr. Dallinger. The list goes on. What I'm getting at is this. I've always thought of the Sphinx Club as wardens of our college's most sacred things. And in the pursuit of these duties, I've always felt that attitudes such as I described were entirely fitting and proper for a student or a club. Chapel's a different matter, however. And I remind the club they're its caretakers and not its masters. So as such, it's a shame to pigeonhole a chapel talk as only being a forum for a particular sort of idea. Now, I've already said I'm not trying to embarrass the club. At this point, I'd actually like to congratulate them on this year thus far. Dr. White's grand conversation is alive and well in the chapel. And I just challenge the club not to get complacent. You've had a great semester. Now let's really open things up and hear what some other people have to say. I'll never turn down the chance to do one of these, but trust me, you can do better. I'm about to step down from my soapbox, but I'd like to add that in my opinion, there's no greater challenge to the integrity of this grand conversation in the chapel or on campus than the issue of coeducation. Allow me to explain. Personally, I'm appalled every time the issue comes up. This is a fine college, one of the best places a young man can receive his education. But as we all know, there's so much more to this place than what happens in the classroom. In my opinion, the college's most precious quality is its unique character, of which the all-male environment seems to me so completely fundamental that I can't imagine after coeducation that could ever be the same. So as such, I'm of the why is everybody always picking on me school of thought. My thoughts on the matter are that there are already plenty of wonderful co-ed colleges where young men and women can pay far much more money for degrees that are far much more prestigious. So why pick on Wabash? Some have argued that Wabash needs to go co-ed in order to truly become a top-tier liberal arts college. I disagree. 5 of the original 7 sisters colleges are still all women, yet who here would scoff at a Bryn Mawr graduate? Of course, the reply to my argument is as typical as the argument itself. With women, it's different. Maybe so, but I can't imagine how a feminist agenda could simultaneously advocate both the co-education of male colleges and the survival of the all-women's college, while further still claiming that either of these issues impact women's equality. In other words, I don't see how an all-female college can be a benefit to its students, while an all-male college is a handicap. And I'm always disappointed to hear Wabash alumni tell stories of giving interviews for jobs or postgraduate institutions and having to make apologies for their education, Socratic or otherwise. Ultimately, I feel that one's education is safe at an all-male institution such as ours. Nothing's lost to us, not in the classroom anyway. The advantages and disadvantages of such a place are intangible things, ultimately making up the unique character of such a place and giving it its charm. If being charming is now an anachronism, I have no issue with Wabash living in the past. I'm oversimplifying both sides of this issue, perhaps irresponsibly, but that's because I didn't come here today to talk about co-education. I mean, as a Wabash graduate, I feel many things when I contemplate co-education. I feel threatened, vulnerable, as though someone's trying to take away some part of me. I do feel betrayed sometimes when I hear of people campaigning for our college to change. Most recently this past fall, where according to a poorly written article in the Indianapolis Star, the issue had once again reared its frightening head. It'd be in poor taste, I thought, for anybody to try and take advantage of our new administration by trying to convince them to alter the college before they were too firmly rooted to allow such a thing. Yet, and here's where that integrity thing I keep talking about comes into play. I have to stop and think about this for a second. I came to Wabash in the fall of 2000, 6.5 years ago. Prior to that, I'd never even heard of this college. Some of these professors, meanwhile, have given decades to this place. The least I could do is hear them out. In fact, for those of you who share my own point of view, I strongly encourage you to educate yourself on both sides of this matter. Professor Barreto wrote an excellent essay on this topic in 2002, titled An Albatross Around Our Necks. It's available on the college website, and I'd highly recommend it. Shouting down at everybody who thinks differently than you will get you about as far as sticking your own head in the sand. In my opinion, it's the surest way to guarantee your own defeat. If Wabash always fights, no self-respecting Wabash man should back down from this one. The tricky thing is that this fight is not won by ignoring coeducation's advocates, but by hearing them out and making your own case like gentlemen. Put the soapbox away now. So far, I've commented on how this is my second chapel, which I've attributed more to my availability and willingness to miss work than my own personal merits, which in turn led me to question the current status of the program, emphasizing its importance to the college, and then just to make my point, I went off on a tangent on a controversial issue. Next thing you know, I'm 4 pages into my speech, still haven't decided on a topic. I suppose that's what you get when you ask a guy to do this 2 days in advance, but at any rate, it seems as good as time as any to say this concludes my opening remarks. So, actually, even as I wrote that last bit about coeducation, I found myself wondering how relevant the issue still was. Granted, at Wabash, the issue never really goes away, any more than whether or not the gentleman's rule is under attack or whether it's appropriate to send all campus emails irresponsibly. Always. That article in the Star that I mentioned was from a while ago, and I really couldn't tell you whether I've just joined an ongoing debate or whether I've just stirred up coals that had been cooling for some time. It surprises me because I only live a block from campus, in the same house I lived in during my last semester here at Wabash a year ago. Didn't plan things that way. I just happened to take a job where it wasn't necessary to move, so I figured why live somewhere else when I'm already settled in. Besides, I thought to myself, I'll be able to visit the college whenever I like, and I'll always know what's happening on campus. You'd be amazed how much that failed to happen. I live closer to this college than many students and most faculty members, yet prior to beginning my daily trips to the Allen Center, I'd go weeks at a time without so much as crossing the street. I knew I was out of touch when the other day, while speaking to a Wabash student, I discovered that Rumors has replaced Tommy's as the bar of choice. Well, I must say I'll believe that when I see it. As I realized I don't have the best grasp of what's relevant on campus these days, I wondered how I could still find something meaningful to talk about for y'all today. It suddenly occurred to me that one thing Wallies never gets sick of hearing are stories about Wabash, so I thought I'd share some of my own. And if I happen across something meaningful along the way, I shall behave as though it was my intent to do so from the very beginning. Otherwise, lunchtime's around the corner. So, first off, I mentioned the gentleman's rule a moment ago, and I'd like to speak about it for a moment before wandering wildly off topic. All Wabash men are to be gentlemen. This is stated matter-of-factly. And yet the true fact of the matter is that it is an imperative. As Wabash men, we are all supposed to be gentlemen. Yet there's another word which you will hear bandied about from time to time, which people also use to describe the typical Wabash student, the caveman. Get the impression that the word was used more often in years past. You can still hear it in the lyrics of the Ballad of the Monon Bell, in which the Wabash students are always described as cavemen. Up until recently, too, The Bachelor every week would have a feature called the Caveman Grunt. I've always enjoyed this word, as I think it aptly describes a typical Wabash man as I imagine him, an uncultured, unwashed meathead with remarkable disdain for anything not related to his most basic and primal impulses, which are, in no particular order, beer, food, sleep, and sometimes girls. Onto this brute, the gentleman's rule is imposed, like a leash on a wild dog, bringing some much-needed order and discipline into the student's life. After all, our rule may not be a rigidly enforced, draconian set of standards, but its simple elegance is, in my opinion, just as effective. In this way, cavemen become gentlemen, and the results speak for themselves. Yet, deep down, we're all cavemen still. What's a caveman without his cave? Wager that not too many Wabash men have actually lived in one, but I did for 2 whole years, and I'd like to tell you about it now. As most of you know, I pledged Sigma Chi my freshman year, but it wasn't in the handsome new building at 701 West Wabash. I lived on the corner of Wabash and Crawford Street, a building that's known today as Crawford Hall. It's not the most conventional looking of buildings. It looks somewhat like the product of an unholy union between a 3-story Pizza Hut and a bowling alley, with the halos surrounding the 3rd story merely for dramatic effect. If I could describe in a word the difference between the old Sigma Chi house and Crawford Hall as it exists today, I'd say it was much dirtier then. Television sets and microwaves were routinely tossed from the 3rd story onto the veranda below, while the chandelier in the living room had supported the weight of many a drunken Sigma Chi. I fell instantly in love with the place, yet I had trouble feeling at home there, largely because I'm a night person. See, as a pledge, I had my own bunk in the coal dorm, while one of the brothers was gracious enough to let me put my computer in his room so that he could type papers on it. At night, when the brothers would go to sleep, I consistently found myself without a place to go. All my things were in a room I was denied access to, and I had no interest in going to bed before 3 a.m. What was a pledge to do? I'm ashamed to say that for a long time I solved this dilemma by discovering a 24-hour computer lab in the armory. Apparently there's a history class that featured the computer game Civilization II as part of its curriculum, and as such, the program was loaded on every computer on the Wabash network. So, like a loser, I literally spent entire evenings playing that game until morning came or I got sleepy. Obviously, this couldn't last. So, I figured things would change my sophomore year when I finally had a room to call my own. Fortunately, it was a very small room with a very fastidious roommate who had no interest in tolerating any of my nonsense. I needed a place to call my own, where I could stay up at all hours of the night playing computer games or listening to obnoxious music without being harassed by my fellow brothers who were too busy trying to sleep so that they could go to class in the morning. Then one day, I found the solution to all my problems. In the basement of the Sigma Chi house, there was a small study room tucked away in the corner, which was our fraternity's token facility for anybody foolish enough to pursue their education under the roof of the Sigma Chi house. In actuality, few people used it to study, so much as it was generally used during parties by people who could not, would not accept that they had to go all the way upstairs to find a bathroom. There is a computer in there, but it was mostly for decoration. There's usually a garbage can, which was usually overflowing, if not completely knocked over. Sometimes this room was used for the storage of empty kegs. Simply put, it was a pigsty, and this is where I chose to make my home. It was a labor of love. I played briefly with the idea of cleaning the carpets, but ultimately wound up ripping them out and hauling them into the dumpster. Furniture, too, was laughable at best, and it, too, was disposed of. I now had a room, perhaps 8 feet by 15, with a single door, no windows, and a drop ceiling with fluorescent lights. Walls and floor had to be bleached several times before I considered them habitable. While the doorknob was broken and required over a week of diligent filing and several trips to the locksmith before it dawned on me to simply call campus services and have a new door installed. Laying down a coat of solid black paint on the floor, walls, and for some reason the ceiling as well, I tossed a mattress on the floor, incidentally also with black sheets, and my cave was finally habitable. I lived in that room for 2 years of relative bliss, my little room with no windows and a door that was easily barricaded from the outside, doubtless in severe violation of some fire code or another. My fraternity brothers took to calling it the Hobbit Hole, or more often, simply the cave. There were a few half-hearted attempts to have me evicted on the grounds of its blatant illegality, or the fact that someone actually wanted to study in the study room. But I'd put weeks of work in this place and would not budge. Understand when I say I put a couple weeks, I don't mean I worked on it in my spare time. I literally did nothing but work on this cave of mine, missing class for days on end in an epidemic of rampant absenteeism that would come to characterize the better part of my college career. If you think the genesis of my cave is a ridiculous story, though, you should have seen the way I lived once I was settled in. I've often been told that if I had been paying for my education, I might have taken it a bit more seriously. See, I was one of those peculiar creatures known as a Lilly Scholar, which meant I attended Wabash on a full scholarship with surprisingly lenient GPA requirements. Now, I believe that as with the gentleman's rule, the idea is that the recipient of such an award should be responsible enough to attend to his own scholarly duties without the threat of losing his scholarship. On the other hand, in my capricious youth, I seem to recall taking this as a carte blanche to pursue my own interests, scholarly or otherwise, without heeding over much the particulars of academic curriculum that may currently have applied to me. It was wonderfully liberating, although terribly irresponsible. I'd miss class for weeks at a time, choosing instead to devote my time to such foolish endeavors as attempting to learn Russian over the internet so that I could sing along with the Soviet national anthem when I was watching Rocky IV on television. I'd stay up for days on end playing Counter-Strike and once miss class all the way from one exam to the next. Somehow I kept my grades up, but typically just because I enrolled in the sorts of classes whose grades were comprised solely of a midterm, a final, and several overdue papers. Now there's a footnote worth exploring. So my years in the cave were some of my most feckless, but the cave as such was not to blame. I learned recently that one of my classmates remembers me as perpetually having several papers overdue, but I blame this and most of my unsavory academic habits on a single paper I wrote freshman year, which would become the latest paper I ever wrote. I wrote this paper for Philosophy 142 as taught by Dr. Plager. My assignment was pretty simple. I was to pick a couple philosophers covered in class, Pick any topic I found interesting that they covered and write perhaps 10 pages on the subject. Too easy. Like most papers I wrote at that time, I generally just wrote about whatever was on my mind and put most of my work into proving it was relevant to the assignment by way of carefully placed block quotations. My topic this time was free will, as discussed by philosophers Leibniz and Spinoza. In as little time as possible, the basic difference I was trying to explore was that Spinoza argued that ours was the only possible universe, while Leibniz suggested that ours was the best possible of infinite possibilities. Spinoza was right, I claimed. There was no such thing as free will. Choice was merely an illusion and a reality with only one possible outcome. Now here's where things got a little out of hand. In deciding who was right, Leibniz or Spinoza, I decided to settle the matter not by philosophical analysis, but by quantum physics. By quantum physics, understand that I really mean science fiction. With a crude knowledge of quantum mechanics and Schrodinger's cat, I attempted to determine whether or not there was such a thing as a parallel universe. If so, free will existed, and each choice simply represented a different but equally real universe, while if there was only one universe, Spinoza, after all, was right, there was no such thing as free will. Now, I'm no physicist, and I'm hardly a philosopher, but I'm sure most of that sounds like complete nonsense. This didn't stop me, however, from checking out every book I could find on the subject of quantum physics, as well as critical analyses of Leibniz and Spinoza. My deadline quickly came and went, but such things couldn't bother me. I was onto something important here. And Dr. Plaker graciously granted me an extension. Thing was, he never explicitly told me how much longer I had, and the research went on and on and on. Long story short, the paper was due in early April. I turned it in the week after commencement. Amazingly, I passed the class. Ironically, even after all that time, I still couldn't conclusively prove my point, so I abandoned the whole quantum physics aspect of the paper, the entire reason for its tardiness, merely handed in a run-of-the-mill, entirely unremarkable philosophy paper. Interestingly, and this is why I brought this story up, in the course of this project, I accidentally convinced myself that there was no free will. The future was already determined and merely had not happened yet, and that I was, therefore, not responsible in any way for any papers I failed to turn in on time. I can precisely remember the moment when I had this revelation. I was in the Sigma Chi house taking a break from writing over at the Armory Computer Lab, making myself a sandwich in the kitchen. Finals week had already ended, and I was feeling a bit silly, more than a little stressed out to still have a paper overdue. So I decided to step outside for some fresh air on the veranda, and that's when I heard it. Across the street, someone in the Phi Psi house had his window open and was playing Toto's Africa. I don't know what it was, but as the music made its way to me on the early summer breeze, suddenly everything seemed to make sense. And that, my friends, is why I was such a terrible student. Believe it or not, though, I may know of a worse one. Mind you, I know plenty of students who left Wabash because of poor grades or not wanting to continue their education, but I think the mark of a truly awful student is that he manages to graduate, but nobody can figure out how. The young man I'm speaking of was named Sean Wiebeck, a beta who I'm pretty sure studied abroad in Spain and many people say never fully came back. Sean was an odd duck, pledged the Sphinx Club at the same time I did. Once when he was drunk, he shaved parts of his head to make himself look like a rooster. Like myself, he was a person of fleeting intellectual pursuits, but he was the sort of student teachers dread. We took Chemistry 101 together with Dr. Z presiding, and together we held the distinction of being informed that if we missed another lab period, there was simply no way we could possibly pass the class. The night I'll always remember Wiebeck for occurred during finals week. It was getting late, and I didn't have a final the next day, so I'd had a couple drinks and had just gone to the cave for a good night's sleep so that I could wake up and study for my exams. That's when Wiebeck came crashing in, hollering that song you hear soccer fans sing, ole, 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 ole. He insisted I join him for a drink or two, and clearly was not going to let me go to sleep, so I really had no choice. So we decided to play a drinking game that night, hooking a PlayStation 2 up to the big screen TV in the Sigma Chi living room, put the latest copy of FIFA Soccer in, and decided to take Juventus to the World Cup from scratch, doing a shot every time a goal was scored. I have no idea how many games were played, how many goals were scored, but before all was said and done, we had drank 1.75 liters of Canadian Mist whiskey, plus whatever else we had lying around. The only reason things finally ended is because the sun had come up and someone told us it was just past 7 a.m. Sean abruptly remembered he had a German final at 9 a.m. He mumbled something about going home to take a shower and wandered over to the Beta House. At this point, I finally went to bed. Now, several astonishing things happened then. First off, when I woke up, I was stark naked on my couch. At first, I wondered what happened to my clothes until I discovered them in a heap by my door, completely covered in pancake syrup. Waback's fate, meanwhile, was much worse. Apparently, his shower consisted of him vomiting for a spell before passing out on the shower stall floor. I'm told he arrived for his German exam just over an hour late and was still the first student to turn his exam in just 10 minutes or so after he sat down. Now, what makes this story so heroic to me is how Sean Waback fared on that exam. You'd think a great ending would be for him to just barely squeak by, maybe to ace the test with flying colors. In actuality, Sean bombed that exam. It wasn't even close, and yet somehow that actually seems more heroic to me. I don't know why. The thing is, Sean was a Spanish major and had no reason to take German save for fun. He might wish he could take that exam a second time, but he didn't need to in order to graduate. So, while he set a terrible example by his reckless and irresponsible behavior, somehow he accomplished something far more stupefying. When he graduated, Sean Waback received a write-up in Berkman's Revenge, awarding him the Ben Kessling Honorary Being Weird Neither Makes You Smart Nor Cool Award. As I wrap things up, which I'm now officially doing, don't worry, I'll just explain who Kessling was. I met him during Lily Weekend when he came prancing into the Sigma Chi dining room in a pair of bowling shoes, singing the theme song from the television show Pinwheel. Kessling was literally a collection of contradictory anecdotes. He was an athletic specimen, built like a Greek statue, despite being a bit of a klutz. He was self-motivated intellectual, but would later go on Jeopardy 2 nights in a row he won before blowing it by forgetting to phrase his answer in the form of a question. He was a religion major and an excellent speaker who often joked about wanting to become a televangelist. But more than any of these things, though, he was a complete jerk, famous for his scathing emails and obnoxious personality. I've never seen a guy with more things going for him fail as horribly with the opposite sex at Kessling at parties. He once composed an all-campus email in which he used the word phrenologist and referred to a parakeet's genitals in the same sentence. After Wabash, Kessling went on to study at Harvard Divinity School. I suspect he chose Harvard merely because he hates liberals and wanted to place himself in a target-rich environment. Many people are surprised to learn that today Ben Kessling is an officer in the Marine Corps, currently training his infantry platoon to deploy to Iraq. Sean Waback, meanwhile, is an Army linguist. People were surprised enough when I joined the service, but I don't think anybody saw it coming with these guys. Not sure exactly what I'm trying to get at there, but I think there's something there, and while I was probably out of time a while ago, I'll try and end on something profound so you won't think I've wasted your time. I think what I'm trying to get at is that Wabash is full of surprises. Whatever you think you'll be when you leave here, sometimes you wind up somewhere completely different. Fortunately, I found that Wabash men tend to be successful wherever they wind up, even if they have no idea how they got there. Furthermore, you'll learn a lot of useful skills here at Wabash, but you'll be surprised which ones you use when you're out in the real world. For example, being able to churn out a 10-page paper in an all-nighter has proven useful for me yet again. So think about that before you decide to do an assignment that can be put off for another day. Finally, remember that there is a real world out there. You will have to join it someday, but meanwhile, your shadow falls upon it, and not the other way around. I can tell you, after living a year in the shadow of you little giants, you're part of something special, and I'm jealous beyond words. I think I've taken up more than enough of your time, so I'll call it a day. As always, it's been a privilege to speak here. Thank you. The Wabash always fights.